I'm Craig Thielen, and this is the 1% Better podcast. Today I'm speaking with Sandra Healy, founder and CEO of Inclusio, and she is calling in from Dublin, Ireland. And unfortunately, Sandra, you're not the first guest from Dublin. Our good mutual friend Finn beat you to that great honor.
Very good. I'm impressed.
Yes, so he's a fun guy, and he connected us. So welcome to the show, the 1% Better podcast.
Thanks, Craig. I'm delighted to be here.
All right, so Sandra, you've been a leading expert in corporate diversity and inclusion for a long time. I think somewhere around 20 years. Examples of some of your work, and it's a long list of your contributions in the space, but you've been involved with establishing the European Union Diversity Charter for Ireland. You're a member of the Expert Advisory Group for Ireland's Citizen Assembly on Gender Equality, and you're a member of the Leadership Advisory Council for Ireland's police force, just to name a few things. So maybe start out with just giving us a little background. How did you get involved with this space? Long before, by the way, it's mainstream, and it's very much talked about, very popular topic, or very sort of important topic in today's age, but it wasn't that way 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. So maybe just start with a little bit of background.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So if I think I might start at the beginning, just around my own background, and bring it up to today, how I ended up in getting involved in diversity and inclusion. So I spent 20 years in the global telecoms industry, and I started out as a technical engineer, and then over the years eventually moved into senior roles in sales and customer delivery and customer experience. And in parallel to that, though, I studied psychology and organizational psychology. Mm-hmm. And while I was in the tech industry, there's one thing that really drives me, and I have one rule, and when I get asked that rule, it's something that I live by myself, and that's don't step over it. Okay, so when a problem comes to me, or if I see something that needs to be addressed, unfortunately, I compel myself to be part of driving that change. And interestingly, that's where diversity and inclusion, that's what brought me to diversity and inclusion. And when I was in tech, what I realized is that, and it wasn't necessarily my own experience, but what I saw was a lot of unfairness. And I saw different people having different experiences, and some of them confided in me around their experience, for example, around neurodivergent individuals, for example, not feeling comfortable about asking for what they need. I saw working parents really struggling to try and get the work-life balance right, both men and women, in fairness, trying to figure out in a really high demanding commercial sales roles and things like that. And I decided then that I wanted to be part of that change. And driven by that sense of fairness, at the time, there was no diversity, equity, and inclusion. I actually went and did some research.
Right.
And how I researched, I went and I interviewed 10 senior leaders across tech, leaders in tech, and asked them, what did inclusive leadership mean for them? And I used that white paper that I developed to get my chief people officer on board, and convinced her to let me set up the first diversity and inclusion committee in Ireland, I think, at the time. I can say that.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's what brought me to it. Accidental, I would say.
Yeah, well, accidentally, but also I think it goes back to the principle that you shared, that you had very early on. You said the principle was, if you see something, don't step over it. It kind of reminds me of this when you go through Heathrow Airport. It's all over the place. See it, say it, sort it, and so it gets printed on your brain. See it, say it, sort it. It's similar to that, but that's a kind of a core value that you had. You made a decision like, hey, I'm seeing something. I'm sensing something. I can either just go, well, that's not my role. That's not my job. Someone else will worry about that. Or maybe I should be the one to help drive this. Again, there wasn't even I don't think the term even existed, as you said. No. So where did that come from? Did you just get ingrained from mom and dad, or you made that decision early on? And have you ever reflected on that?
Well, I grew up in a house with 3 boys, right? So I certainly think that that's helped me in my technical engineering role, and particularly for those 20 years in telecoms, because particularly in the early days, I would have spent a lot of time in teams where sometimes I was the only woman. So I think that early grounding of finding how to compete with 3 boys in the house. I think I certainly think that helped me. So a lot of the unfairness I saw wasn't necessarily my own experience. Where does it come from? I think it was a question actually I was asked recently when I was being interviewed around where did it come from. So like my mother and father split up when I was 4.
Okay.
And I can tell you 1980s Ireland was not the place to be a single parent, and it certainly wasn't the place for us either, unfortunately, going into Catholic schools and all that kind of thing. I think in some cases we were viewed very differently because we came from a single parent household. So maybe it came from that. I don't know. I know our values are very much kind of coded into us from our early experiences and our communities and our families. But I do think that judgment that was kind of imparted on us as a family very early on, I'm sure that had some influence on my sense of fairness. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, tell us a little bit more about inclusio. Why did you start it, and what does inclusio do?
Yeah, so again, it's kind of grounded in everything we've just been talking about, which is not stepping over the problem. So what I realized as I moved into senior roles, at the last company I worked in, for example, was Vodafone, and I was in with the senior leadership team presenting KPIs and metrics and data around things like customer delivery, customer experience, sales metrics. And what I realized is I actually had no metrics to be able to demonstrate the very meaningful work and the impactful work we were doing around culture and diversity, equity and inclusion. And at the same time, when I was studying organizational psychology, I was learning around the science, around how you measure and quantify culture, which is inherently difficult to measure because it lives in the collective behaviors of every individual in the organization. So it's always shifting. So I decided that I wanted to be part of that solution. And so when I finished my master's, it was myself and 10 slides at the time. I spun the idea into Dublin City University, that's where I had studied my master's. And I went into the university as head of equality, diversity and inclusion. So I went in and worked for the university for just under 5 years to develop and deliver the strategy for the university. I also established the DCU Centre of Excellence for Diversity and Inclusion, which I describe as taking the academic research off the shelf and getting that out into business and getting that out into being actioned and helping organizations with some of the challenges they were facing around talent management and culture and things like that. And that's where I describe inclusio came from, because inclusio brings the kind of data element to that. So I spun the idea into the university in 2016. We secured Enterprise Ireland commercialisation funding, which is that's funding, which is, I think it's unique to Ireland, absolutely brilliant. If you have an idea and you're in an academic institution, you can get state funding to help you incubate and R&D that idea. So I brought on 2 co-founders, and between the 3 of us then over 4 years, we researched, designed, built and spun out inclusio in 2020.
Okay, well, I guess the first challenge you had is getting data, right? Because that's the whole point of inclusio, is how do we get data so we can measure progress, we can measure where we're at, and what maybe some of the actions that you're deploying, are they working, and do you need to sort of shift some of that? So I guess one of the obstacles that seems like pretty obvious to me is this getting over the chasm of employees sharing this kind of information. I mean, it's more than just demographics, right? It's actually how are they feeling, what's happening, what are those behaviors? Some of it gets into some, I guess, touchy-feely or, sort of feelings or what have you. So how do you get over that, just getting employees comfortable sharing data and kind of some of their feelings that they're going through, so you could start to collect data and start to, do something with it?
Yeah, and before we started to build, I describe it as before we built one line of code, we did a deep dive research with 35 global companies, because we wanted to figure out what's the problem we're trying to solve. Are other companies having the same challenge I was having? And what we found is when we spoke to the employers, they said to us, we want to be reflective of the customers and the communities we serve, but we don't know who we have in the organization. So it's very difficult for us to re-engineer or adapt our hiring efforts when we don't know who we have in the organization. The second thing they said to us is, we think we're doing really good work in diversity and inclusion. You know, we're rolling out these global programs, and fingers crossed, we hope what we're doing sticks. But we have no way to measure return on investment and to get that leadership buy-in and show that what we're doing is actually having an impact. And then when we spoke to the employees in the same companies, they said to us, we do not like disclosing personal things about ourselves and having that attached to our HR systems and records. We see a lot of companies now, and a lot of HR systems, for example, have you just switch on your self-ID. And wouldn't it be absolutely wonderful if employees trusted that? But that's what we found in our research, that they don't. And in fact, they said to us, you know, we have access to these annual engagement platforms and surveys and all of this kind of thing, but we generally don't trust the confidentiality of them. So we want to be heard. We want to be part of the change. You know, we want our managers to get better. We don't want them to get into trouble, but we don't trust the systems that are here. So we took all of that on board and took on that challenge around, okay, how are we going to address that? And I remember the first thing I said to my team is, I want us to build a beautiful piece of software. That was the number one remit. You know, there's a lot of fatigue out there around surveys. There's a lot of engagement platforms, all very same. I wanted us to build something that was completely different and looks and feels like software you use in your everyday life. One of the other components of it was taking into consideration that, you know, the world is distributed now, you know, people working from anywhere, and we needed to be able to figure out how were we going to meet people where they're at. And we also had to figure out that people are time poor, and there's a lot of stuff coming at them every day. So we used behavioral science. So this concept of short interactions over time, we know are more likely to encourage behavior change. So we deployed and embedded behavioral science into every single aspect. So we created a beautiful piece of software, one that people trust. It's easy and simple to engage with, and it's short interactions. And when you put all of that together, you can use it on any device. It's very personal, and it's yours, essentially. So, and it's about trust. I think that's the key word here, Craig. And that's one thing that we've proven. Like, we're going into our 4th year now. We get exceptionally high levels of participation and completion in every sector that we've worked in. And that's a testament to what we've built, but it's also around how we communicate around building that trust.
Right. So clearly it is all about trust, right? And so how did you earn that trust? Is it that communication up front that says, listen, this is a third party, we de-identify data, nothing's going to be, and you sort of go through and really have to educate them? So, because the natural reaction is, well, if I say something negative, there might be some retribution from my manager, or someone's going to see something, and it doesn't even have to be to a person. It could be, but this department's really unhappy with this, so we're going to go put a lot of attention on this department. And so there, you know, I would assume there's a lot of sort of fear about that. So how do you get through that trust, and what kind of techniques you use, or communication helps with that?
Yeah, I think it is about communication, and it's about taking the time to make sure that we communicate and, you know, not rush in and switch it on. You know, it is around making sure that we bring the people on the journey. And we're a social impact business. That's something that's really important for me. We are a business. To have impact, we need to be a business. But for us, we represent the voices of people in work. And every person in Inclusio takes that very seriously. And that's the starting point. Like, we built this platform for people to be heard in work. We listened to them through our research. And when they said to us, we don't trust the confidentiality, we said, okay, let's build a platform that you can trust the confidentiality, that maintains that anonymity and gives you the opportunity to give the deep, pinpointed feedback that your organization needs to take action to make your life better and to make things better for you and your team. So that was really important. We take that very seriously, and we take the time to deliver that message.
Yeah.
And it's not just that. Like, it is a combination of the experience of going through Inclusio, because the whole organization is going through it at the same time, building that baseline. And actually what we found now is we have customer documented case studies of customers saying that it has transformed their culture, because there's a learning component in the platform. So people are learning what it's like for people who are different from themselves. And that's a very different component. Like there's lots of platforms out there that, listening platforms that capture data and all of that. Ours is very much based on science. It's listening. So it's giving people back something at the same time as they're giving us something. And what it does essentially is aggregates and builds a very comprehensive scientific benchmarked view of what's going on at every level in the organization.
Right. And benchmark, meaning you can break it down and say, how are we doing in different segments of our organization, however you want to break that down, I assume, by sort of location or function or age or other certain markers, but also you could compare against other companies in your industry or other companies in, the maybe geographic region of the world or et cetera, right? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the data. Okay. So you get over the hump of people are willing to share and you figured that out. What are the core metrics that, I'm sure you can sort of tailor it to some degree to each organization, but there's got to be kind of this core set of metrics that you say, let's go and gather this information so we can baseline and we can say what, sort of actions do we want to do to address maybe some of the lower, laggards or, so what are those core metrics and what are those metrics telling you now, with all the data that you've seen?
Yeah, I think we can say that we capture one of the deepest demographic profiles that exists in the world. We collect a lot of protected characteristic data. That's part of our expertise. Particularly myself and the team, like we would have worked at a European level and at a national level as well at kind of setting language and things around how you capture that type of data in a very inclusive way. We also developed a scientific model around culture. So when we spun out of the university, we had 240 data points in our model of culture, and we've now standardized that, and we have the 64 points of inclusive culture. So within our model, we capture information on trust, psychological safety, job supports, well-being, and then the ultimate belonging. Okay. So we just published a paper recently on how belonging is the new engagement, which is quite interesting because engagement has always been the metric, the number one metric that HR use.
So define that for us, because that is a new term, or it's a different term that I'm used to hearing. I am used to hearing about, hey, we want people engaged and really involved, but what is your definition of belonging?
Yeah, so belonging is an environment and where you feel that you're valued for who you are. So it's not a case of you have to leave a piece of you out, okay? So you can go into work, you can be yourself, and you're valued for who you are. That's the first thing. The second thing is that you get the opportunity to contribute to the success of the organization. That's a really, really important point. And that's where it kind of links in with psychological safety. And interestingly now, Amy Edmondson, you're probably familiar with her work around psychological safety. Mm-hmm. And she's starting to link now how belonging is a really, really important component of the activation of psychological safety and how you start to shift that towards more innovative work behavior and things like that. So engagement is an output of belonging. Okay, so if we think about belonging, if you're in work, whether you're physically in work or virtually in work, if you feel that you can be yourself, that you're valued for that, and that you're contributing to the success of the organization and you're valued for that, and you feel part of the whole, that's essentially what belonging is. And the output of that is more productivity, you stay longer, and higher levels of engagement. So it's an interesting one.
Yeah, it is an interesting one, and it feels to me like there's a balance there that you want to belong to be part of a company and feel like, hey, I'm part of where this organization is going. I'm part of this department, this team, and so there's that aspect. But then there's like, hey, but I'm an individual, and I really like music, or I really like sports, or I'm really into like introspection, or whatever defines yourself, and I want to bring all of me to work. And so there's this kind of, it's not a contradiction, but it's like two forces of, we've got individuals and you want to bring all of what gets them excited and what their
Yeah.
superpowers, some people call them, or their talents. But then we all want to be part of kind of a corporate culture that says, here's who we're about, and we're one team. So it's kind of bringing those two things together, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm listening to you smiling because you've just described culture and corporate culture, because if you think about culture and where does it come from, I mentioned it earlier. So the culture is and our values and our beliefs, like that gets coded into us. Yeah, and as we when we come into the world, and if we're lucky enough, we're born into a family and a community, and our education system and all that brings codes into us, our values and our beliefs, which starts to drive our behaviors and drives how we interact with others. And that's our culture, essentially. And when we go into an organization, it's the leader's responsibility in the organization to think about, okay, how do we set the tone? What's the tone? How do we become the beacons of this is how we do things around here? And that's the work of the leader that's never done, okay?
Right.
Because that shifts. That's contextual to where do you operate? What's your business? Who are your customers? How do you interact with them? Who do you have in the organization?
Right.
What kind of generational mix do you have? Do you have neurodivergent individuals? Do you have members of the LGBT plus? So this is where inclusio comes in. It's very, very difficult for you to understand how do you create an individual culture would have a single culture where everybody is rowing in the same direction. If you don't know who you have in the organization, it's very difficult for you to intersect that with the culture.
Yeah. No, it's a fascinating topic. It's one of my favorite topics. So in our business, in management consulting, we do a lot of transformation work, and you quickly learn when you're doing real transformation that really all roads lead to two things. You can talk about what kind of transformation, you can talk about all these great outcomes, but it really leads to two things. One is strategy. So where are we going? Like, what's our vision? Where do we want to be? Who do we want to be? And then culture, which is how do you want to get there, right? What are those behaviors that are acceptable? What are those behaviors? Because there's lots of ways of getting to a goal. So where do we want to go? And then how do we want to get there? And so I quickly sort of glom onto that in any organization. And of course, it's fascinating when you've worked with hundreds of organizations. It's fascinating to see how quickly you can pick up on culture, like just the words they use, how they interact, how there's rank in the room, how they deal with stress, how they deal with issues. So it's really fascinating. One thing I got to ask you though is, speaking of culture, I don't know if you're familiar with this book, The Culture Map.
I am, yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
so
very good.
So Aaron Meyer, and so I use that because one of the things I love about it, and it's fairly easy to read and understand, is it really dissects for you a global culture, okay, not just corporate culture, but global culture. And so how do Japanese show up as opposed to Americans, as opposed to Germans, as opposed to Ireland? And people show up very different because we all grew up in sort of a country culture, right?
Yeah.
And so my question to you is, how does that factor in? Because that you could be measuring those same, core metrics that you just talked about, and it's very different in Japan as it would be in Ireland or Germany or America, even different parts of America. So how do you sort of filter and factor that in?
Yeah, I think if I think about what we measure, so we measure the conditions, right? The conditions, the corporate culture that exists in the organization. I think what you're describing there is around the nuances of understanding the cultural nuances, and how do you adapt and take responsibility for your communication as you interact with different people who are different from yourself. Okay. I think for us and how we measure culture, it's around setting the tone of the organization. So getting into that, the DNA, if you like, around this is the policies and practices. Are we doing the right things? This is how we're working, and this is how we do things in this organization. Like, you'll have a culture within a team, as you've just described there, Craig. You're going to have a culture within different parts of the business and different locations. So you need to have that grounding and that basis of the fundamentals of the culture and the behaviors, and then the nuances, as you're describing, of how we interact with each other. So like a perfect example, right? So quite often we can hear organizations say one of our values is respect. Okay, I'll use a simple one, and that's all good and well, having a value of respect, but what does that actually mean? So when you start to translate that into an actual behavior, you need to start thinking about them. Well, what does that mean for the people in the organization, and they interact with each other? And when they interact with each other in different parts of the world, it's the responsibility of your own responsibility and of the organization to help you understand what does that respect look like, and those principles around that happen. Like it's a challenging one, and I think I've worked with organizations over the years as they've grown multicultural workforces here in Europe, and it's always a big challenge. 150 nationalities all working on the one floor. How do you create that consistent culture and that consistent experience? And one of the things that's really important, which goes back to something you mentioned earlier, Craig, is around that individuality. That's important, because you're not asking people to say, leave yourself outside the door and everything that comes with you. It's not about that. It's around the fundamentals of how we interact as humans in here. And it's not something that should be compromising on who you are as an individual, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. There's so many layers.
There's so many layers. Yeah,
so many layers to culture, and it's all contextual, right? So again, it depends. Are we talking at the team level, the department, the corporate level, even the community you live in, or the country? The same exact behavior could be treated as, boy, this is really bothering me. It hurts me. I'm offended by it. In another sort of country culture, part of region of the world, it can be perfectly acceptable.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, this is how things work here. Like in the Japanese culture, you don't directly give, bad criticism, or you don't directly address it. Things are much more subtle. Okay. Whereas in the East Coast of the US, it's like, you just say it, like, hey, I didn't like what you said, or that was a crappy job that you just did. And that's like, cool, thanks for telling me. But if you said that in Japan, it'd be like, whoa, we have a massive problem, right? So it's really, there's so many layers to it.
It's actually one of our first customers, Craig. We're a global aviation company that had operations in Japan. So exactly as you describe, it was a good experiment for us, right? Rolling out inclusio globally for a company that had gone through an acquisition. So they had very different people, some functions doing the same roles in different parts of the world. And we actually worked with them, took the inclusio data, so that baseline data, and worked with them over the following year to help get that, create a consistent experience and a consistent culture for people right across the organization. Because when I describe culture and the work that needs to be done, really what we're trying to do is create a consistent experience for the human, no matter what part, no matter what team they work in, no matter what part of the world you work in, no matter what level you're at, that you experience the culture in a very consistent way. And that's the culture that we measure. Now, obviously, there's going to be nuances in how people interact and get to know each other. And in fairness, that's part of the learning that we have built into the platform, is learning around things like unconscious bias and stereotypes, and creating respectful curiosity around people who are different from yourself.
Yeah, great points. So speaking of unconscious bias, a topic that comes up almost every one of our podcasts here is AI, and we live in an AI world now that we're not going to be going backwards. So my question for you is, how are you viewing AI and generative AI? It's all around us. We're using it more and more every day. It's integrated. Is that helpful in helping some of these challenges and goals around DEI, or is it actually in some ways, making it worse, because AI can be very biased for many reasons, and depending on how you use it, it could actually, possibly have you go backwards or cause unintended consequences. So how do you view that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of discussions now, and I can see there's a lot of guidelines being published now around in Europe and in different parts of the world around how do we deal with that. And, the quality of the data and the quality of the decision making is based on what Where, what's the train, what is the data, what's the decision making trained on, what's the data set? And if there's bias in the data set, unfortunately, that's what we're starting to see then, is that the output is biased. So I think if I was to look at the Australian government's principles, ethical AI principles, that's what we built our platform on.
Okay.
And some of the key principles, the very first one is do no harm. That's the first one. Another one is around making sure that it is testable and transparent. And I think there's a lack of that personally. This is my view, okay? That, AI is relatively new for the world, and bias is going to be inherent in it. So we need to find ways that we try and balance that. And the way to do that is testable and transparent around the data sources. And I will say one other thing on it is being taking responsibility and accountability when you find that it's not, and correcting it.
Right.
Because unfortunately, what we're finding now is the speed to get it out there is that when we find that it is biased, what we should be doing is saying, okay, how do we correct that? Let's take action and course correct. And unfortunately, that's not happening.
The classic example of this is the Google Gemini, that came out, and it was so far on sort of a diversity scale that you literally couldn't actually even get like realistic depictions of people out, even if you tried to say, like, what did the United States Congress look like in 1776? And it was all, African American and Hispanic. It's like, wait a minute, that wasn't real. I mean, it might have been something we wanted, but it's not real. So on that topic, this is certainly a very controversial topic in the U.S., potentially globally. But I guess my question leads me to is, like, can you go too far on DEI? Like the Google Gemini, they pulled it after 3 days and said, whoa, we're getting a backlash. We need to go back and recalibrate. But, there's controversy about, allowing, men or transgender women into sort of women's sports and all sorts of things. So can you actually go too far? And again, from your, sort of corporate involvement experience, you have to find that right balance, or just how are you seeing that?
Yeah, I think diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? It's turned into an acronym of DEI. If we break that down, and what does that mean? So when I describe diversity, that's a technical term for everyone is individually different, right? There's no two humans, whether we grew up in the same house, same. There's no two of us are exactly the same. So if that's our understanding of diversity, that we're all individually different, that's the starting point, okay? Equity then is around understanding that over the years, some systemic barriers have been created that exclude certain parts of certain groups of people. So if we commit to equity, whether it's in the workplace or in the world, equity is about understanding where those barriers are and trying to redress and address and create equitable access. And I think that's important, right? And that's driven again by fairness. And if we think about inclusion, if we look at the research around inclusion and exclusion, I remember reading a study when I was in the university, and there was scientists that published, neuroscientists published some research that said exclusion to the human is the same as getting a physical kick. That's how it lights up the part of the brain, being excluded. And we see that. We see that in our kids.
Yep.
We see that what happens in schools, right?
Yeah, if you're the last kid picked on a team, you're picking out of the 10 kids and you pick 5 and 5, the last one picked, that is just as bad, maybe worse than getting kicked, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So if you break down DEI into we're individually different, sometimes the system is stacked against us and we want to redress that because we know better now. I say that in inverted commas. And inclusion, we're here for a short time. Nobody wants to be excluded, particularly when it comes to our group of people. And this is, again, where belonging, nobody wants to be excluded. That's part of the human condition. We're tribal people. We want to be part. So when you put all those things together, I think what's happened is, I suppose it's the way of the world in 2024, isn't it? Social media and I suppose it being used in the way that it was not intended to use. But I think as humans and individuals, You can only do what you can do personally yourself. And I think for me, certainly it's about taking personal responsibility about your impact, and the impact that you have on the people around you. And, if you're brave enough and you can do it, don't step over it, do something about it and be part of that change.
Yeah, either way, whether it's going too far or not enough, like it's still dealing with it. And it has become sort of weaponized in certain cases or politicalized for sure. There's no question about that. So, but
I definitely think politicalized. And like, what can we do? We have to just go with the flow, I think. And,
well, hopefully we can, we get to vote at some point, right? If we're in a democratic society and we get to sort of influence and have a say in that too. But so let maybe just switch gears here, get out of the sort of politics side. We could have a whole show on that part probably. But I guess I'm really curious. You've got a lot of data now. You've had, I don't know how many years of like pretty good sized data. I guess my question is, are we getting better in corporate America at, not just awareness, but actually like the numbers and the metrics are headed in the right direction? Do you see any mega trends, or what do you see in there?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. One thing that I think surprised all of our customers and surprised us was the number of people self-identifying around neurodivergence. So, and that was quite interesting. Like, we haven't had an organization with any less than, I think 12% is probably the lowest. Some, would you believe, up to 19% of people self-identifying around neurodivergence.
So define that for us. What do you?
Yeah, so that could be things like autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia. So those type of things that quite often can coexist, just to say. And sometimes they can create challenges for us then in work, around how instructions are given or how we interpret things, or even sometimes I think we're all aware sometimes physical environments for some people, overstimulation can be a challenge and things like that. So what we're finding is, through our research, is that we have higher levels of people self-identifying with us, but not self-identifying and asking for what they need for their employer. So that's a challenge. Okay. So it's great that we now know that it's something that needs to be addressed, but now we need to figure out how are we going to do that. And actually, we're working with Professor Lawrence Fung in Stanford University. And Dr. Chris McLaughlin in Ulster University. We've been working for the last 2.5 years tracking our data, and we have some publications coming out now later this year around how, when all things are the same, what's different for neurodivergent individuals in work, and around how they're connected to the organization. So that's an emerging trend, Craig, that I think has kind of unanticipated by employers, but thankfully now we're able to use our data now to help organizations know how they need to address that. I think another thing that's come up for us, we were talking earlier about benchmarking. So we've brought the insurance sector together here in this part of the world, and they've given us permission to combine their data. And we've published the first of its kind sector benchmarking. The report is on our website. And very interesting what we find, what's come out of that, is there's work to be done around employment of people with disabilities. So we have the national stats, we have the European stats, and when we start to look in now at a sector, we start to see that we don't have that representation. So what I like about what we do is it's informed action. So you see where you're doing well, you see where you have a gap, and then you can create an intervention, whether we're part of that intervention or not, create an intervention then to take action and address that underrepresentation or that challenge that has been uncovered.
So, that data is just incredibly valuable for organizations, but short of, having access to that, let's say a company, or there's some people listening out there that, don't have access to that data. Is there any sort of just real basic practical advice you can give to people to say, hey, how do you make your team, your department, your company, better, in this space? Any sort of guidance or advice you'd give on that?
Yeah, I think work with inclusio. I have to say that I'm biased, obviously.
Right, of course.
And why do I say work with inclusio? Because we set out to address a challenge, and that was to give people a voice in work. And what we know is that people don't necessarily trust the different platforms and the different ways of they're asked to give feedback at the moment. And we have found a way that people trust. So I think it would be very, very difficult, if not impossible, for you to be able to create an inclusive culture and say or proclaim that you are representative of society if the people have not given you the data. I don't see how that would work. And there's a lot of badges out there and accolades and different things that you can be part of that make you look good. But if it's not based on the voice of your people, how can you
have the data? Yeah.
How can you say? Yeah.
You got to have the data. Yeah. And I can even see that, just in our own organization, we're part of a big, large global, and the topic came up in let's say like a leadership kickoff, global leadership kickoff meeting about diversity inclusion, and the topic was specifically around women and what are we doing, because in the tech business, it's, as you stated earlier, like very low percentage traditionally, and ours was kind of in that realm. So what are you doing to promote opportunities for women, whether it be at large or leadership positions, et cetera? And it was kind of like didn't know what to say. Leadership didn't know what to say. Because they didn't have a strategy, a policy, they didn't have data. And so it was kind of like, oh yeah, we're going to look at it and we're going to do our best and we support you and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Well, now fast forward, that was like 5 years ago, let's say. Now fast forward now, well, we have a governance committee. We actually track metrics, that, by different parts of the organization, different leadership. And we can report on it, and we have goals. So even that's a basic first step.
Yeah.
Don't just give it lip service, but okay, what is it? What are our goals? Get some data, even if it's a basic sort of demographics, and let's set some targets and let's take some actions. Let's have some governance. So that's like step one. And I can see a difference in just how we act, how we report, and how we make decisions. So that's a practical example in our world.
And I think it's great to hear that, because you have to start. You have to, if you don't measure it, it doesn't get done. And I think the next evolution for your organization then is going to be intersecting that with the cultural experience, because in some ways, when we focus on diversity, not that women are diverse because we're 51% of the population, right? But when you focus on that underrepresented group, whoever they happen to be, when you bring them into the organization, the cultural conditions need to shift to make sure that they're welcome, that we get the best out of them, and making sure that managers are equipped to create that consistent experience across the organization. Mm-hmm. Like we have had some of our global customers stop hiring in certain parts of their business when they got their cultural insights, because they said it's a revolving door. Now we see what's going on. Now that we understand the cultural experience in that particular location, we need to address that problem before we hire. So they're actually saving money by halting, addressing the problem, and then back hiring to bring the underrepresented groups in.
Yeah, very good. Well, Sandra, time has flown by. So we're at the end of our time here, but we always finish with one question, the same question, which is, putting everything that we just talked about aside, just kind of reflecting on your entire life and your career, and, what kind of life advice would you give, whether it be to yourself when you were younger, that you wish you knew, or to your grandkids, or some young people that you'd want them to know as they're sort of beginning their life? What sort of 1% better life lessons would you share?
I think I live my 1% life lesson. I recognize that I learn from every mistake I make. So I use that to be better, faster, moving forward. I think certainly moving into entrepreneurship in my 50s, I don't think I ever thought that was in my horizon, but I felt compelled to follow something that I believe I needed to bring to the world, and that's inclusio. So I think follow your dream, I suppose, and never give up. I don't think you can ever give up. And, I see people around me. I'm in the startup world now. I spent many years in corporate. I'm in the startup world now. And I see the brave founders that, some are successful, some scale, some fail. It's a brave move. But if you have entrepreneurship in you and you have an idea, go for it. That's what I would say. And it doesn't matter. There's no such thing as the right time or the wrong time or too late. None of that. If it's in you and you want to do it, I go for it. You know, that it's very exciting. It's rewarding. It's tough. But I love it. And the advice I would have given myself, I think, is make sure you do that, Sandra.
Right. And if you see something, don't step over it.
Don't step over it, yeah.
Love that. Very good. Well, thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun talking with you.
Thanks,
And
Craig.
we all learned a lot. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the 1% Better podcast. We hope you found it insightful and useful for your improvement journey. As always, you can access podcast transcripts and links to reference material at trissential.com/podcast. If you would like to be a guest on 1% Better, you can do it on the same site. And if you enjoyed today's podcast, please like, share, or rate our podcast. Until the next episode, here's to getting 1% better every day.